Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Spirit Reports of Life After Life. And today, the report is based on Allan Kardec's. We will be focusing on a new chapter. We know that Heaven and Hell has two parts, and in the second part of this book, Allan Kardec gifts us with many spirit reports, and they're categorized into 5 or 6 different categories. In the last few months, we focused on the happy spirits, and now we will be starting with the next chapter, and that is the average spirits. And we will see that what we learned in the last few months was what the good spirits, what the more evolved spirits did in order to have a happy life during life after life. And now we will be seeing that the picture is a little mixed. So we are going to page 321 in Heaven and Hell, and we will be examining Joseph Bray. Hello, Karina, Lisi, so nice to have you. Thank you, dear friend. So Joseph Bray must have been older when he died, because he's conversing with his grandson. So Joseph Bray was an honest man according to God or according to men, and that is the question. So let us see. The first question that the grandson of Joseph Bray asks to his granddad is, "Dear Grandpa, would you please tell me how you're doing in the world of spirits and give me any instructive details that might be useful?" And the answer his grandfather gives is, "Anything you want, dear child. I'm expiating my disbelief, but God's goodness is great, and He takes circumstances into account." Let us pause, dear friends. So he's saying God's goodness is great. Now, when we look at God's goodness, we know God is good. There's beautiful songs, and we feel it every day, dear friends, correct? We're feeling that God is good. To the Spirit's book. I'm apologizing. It seems like that my internet connection is slow again. It seems to happen a lot on Sunday nights, so there's nothing I can do about it, unfortunately. So every time I see that it slows down, I will pause. So trust that you will not miss anything. So anyway, God's goodness. We're going to the Spirit's book right at the beginning. Question 13. Allan Kardec is concerned and wondering about the attributes of God. And here's the list. We learned that God is eternal, God is immutable, God is immaterial, God is one, there is not more than one God, God is all-powerful, and here is the last one, God is supremely just and good. And that's what we have been looking for, because the grandpa says God's goodness is what helps him to undo something he has done wrong. He is really happy to know that God is good. And here's what Allan Kardec tells us about that. The providential wisdom in the divine laws is revealed in the smallest things as well as in the largest. And this wisdom makes it impossible for us to doubt either God's justice or goodness. We know that in the third part of the Spirit's book, we find the divine laws. And the divine laws are explained in greater detail through questions and answers by Allan Kardec and the spirits on high. So it is due to the divine experience, the goodness of God. So we're invited to study the divine laws. And we will in a minute refer to them back and look a little bit at them. So this is why the grandpa says God's goodness is great, because one of God's attributes is justice and goodness. So then he continues to say, "I am suffering, but not like you might think. I regret not having taken better advantage of my time." Friends, Yes, taking time, taking good care of our time is of utmost importance. You may remember that there is a beautiful story in Jesus in the Home, and it is on page 87. Yes, page 87. And it is called The Divine Talisman. We did a beautiful study with Vanessa just fairly recently on every single chapter, and it is chapter 22. And what we learn about when the disciples met one night, he was asked by Isabel, "Lord, might you be carrying some sort of talisman whose powers we could benefit from? Some kind of magical object that might help us?" And here's what Jesus said. "In fact, I do know of a talisman that has wondrous powers," he says, "by taking advantage of its miraculous resources for the things of our Father." Wow, that sounds intriguing, friends, right? That is something we want to know. What is it? And he says, "It will enable you to discover the treasures of love. And it unveils understanding wherever discord punishes the hearts. And it opens the door to the revelations of art and science. And it invites the blessing of meditating on holy things. And this talisman reestablishes relations between conflicting parties. And this talisman also discloses passages of light to minds lingering in darkness. And it also allows for the blessed spread of happiness. This talisman is clothed in 1,000 opportunities for widespread peace. It reveals a vast network of pathways for wholesome work. It uncovers 1,000 ways to enhance our lives. This talisman also facilitates the soul's access to the thought of great masters. This talisman also facilitates the soul's access to the thought of great masters. And it enables communications with the heavenly fountainheads of intuition. Wow, that is an amazing gift, an amazing talisman. Wouldn't you like to know what it is? I would like to. Let's see what we hear. So then Jesus says, without this divine talisman, it is impossible to start any work of light and peace on earth. So it is vital for our good work on earth. So then Isabel says, "Master, where can we get such a blessing?" And we wonder too, right? We're like, "Isabel, what is it?" And then Jesus says, "Time is the divine talisman." Time is the divine talisman. Isn't that incredible to see that time really covers pretty much all facets of our lives? And if we think about it, when we incarnate, God gives us a little package. And this package is our individual time frame that we have on earth to do the good, to work on our inner transformation, to make a difference, to be of service, to be charitable, benevolent, indulgent, forgiving. And it is only when we use this time, this little package that we all have, and it's individually, it's a different size for each and every single one of us. And it is only when we use this time wisely that we'll complete with our work. So time is of the essence, as they say, correct, friends? So if you want to read the whole story, this was just a part of it. It is chapter 22, The Divine Talisman, in Jesus in the Home. And then when we go to Money, which is also by Emmanuel, this wonderful little book, you find it again on Kardec Radio. Dr. Vanessa Anzalone did a study group several years ago on this amazingly transformational little booklet. It is and does not only deal with money, but here on page 139 we see each of us receives an inheritance of past possibilities of service that characterize our tendencies in this world, according to the merits and needs that we may present. So in other words, Emmanuel is telling us we all are the heirs of our past good deeds and missed opportunities, which we can observe with the attention. We will know. So then Emmanuel continues to say, for this reason, it is indispensable to use time wisely, because this is our golden opportunity in this lifetime to do it differently, to work on our inner transformation in a renewed effort. We all have been blessed with the gift of spiritism, the light of discernment, and we can study and practice what we're studying every single day wisely, to use our time wisely. So friends, no wonder that Grandpa is saying, well, time is very important, and he has some regrets that he did not use his time as wisely as he could during his lifetime. And remember, Grandpa, namely Joseph Bray, is an average spirit. So, question number 2. How can you say you did not employ your time well? The grandson is asking. You always lived as an honest man. Yes, he answers, in the judgment of others. But there is an abyss between honesty before men and honesty before God. So there is an abyss between honesty before men and honesty before God. You want to learn, dear child, so I will try to show you the difference. Now, friends, this is going to be educational for us. So then he says, there among you, men are regarded as being honest when they respect the laws of their country, a respect that is quite flexible for many. And when they do not harm their neighbors by ostensibly taking their property, even though they often unscrupulously rob them of their honor and their happiness, as long as the penal code or public opinion cannot reach them. And that is true, dear friends, right? We've maybe seen it in ourselves or maybe in others. We see it in governments. We see it all over planet Earth. And that is that even if we follow the civil laws of our country, we're now learning it's not enough. Just being good before our civil laws is not enough. And of course, cutting corners and not even obeying our civil laws is one little step worse. So let us see what is actually meant by following God's laws. The grandfather then says, not breaking the laws of men is not enough before God. Above all, one must not have transgressed the divine laws. We must not digress the divine laws. And as we said earlier, the divine laws we find in the Spirit's book in the 3rd part. Every single one is explained through questions and answers in greatest details. So when we go to the Spirit's book right now, we go to question 614, and let us see how the divine laws are actually 614, which is in the 3rd part of the Spirit's book. The first question under the chapter named Divine or Natural Law is, what is meant by natural law? And the answer from the illuminated spirits is, natural law is the law of God. All right, so we learned one thing right here and then, that the natural law is also God's law. It's the same thing. It is the only law, namely God's law, is the only law that is truly necessary for human beings to be happy. It shows them what they should or should not do, and they only suffer misfortune when they depart from it. So here we see, all we need is not even the civil laws. The most important thing, of course they are very important, and they're one step in the right direction. We know that and we acknowledge that very deeply. But what is really bringing us happiness, that is leading us on our path towards perfection is following God's laws. And then in question 615, Allan Kardec is now very wisely asking, is God's law eternal? So in other words, eternal means that it's actually non-changeable, correct? Because if it's eternal, then it's pretty fixed, much more fixed than our civil laws, because they change during our own evolution. They change. The civil laws only reflect our personal evolutionary point in time, meaning us humans. Do you think God's law is eternal? The answer is, it is as eternal and immutable as God is. And that gives us safety, because if we go and we study God's laws, we know we're in good hands. It's a fact. There are facts. So now we know God's law equals natural law, and God's law equal natural law is eternal. Then we go to question 617, and here Allan Kardec now wonders, what do the divine laws encompass? Do they apply to anything other than moral conduct? Very good question, correct, friends? Is there more to God's laws than our moral conduct? Is it covering more than what pertains to our moral conduct? And the answer is, all the laws of nature are divine, because God is the author of all things. And then as he continues to explain, without reading the whole section, he is dividing us humans in our relationship and our relationship with God. So the moral laws, the second arm of the divine laws, really regulate our relationship as human beings with God. They help us to become better people. They help us with our inner transformation. So friends, you see there's two arms to the divine law. One is the material law. It pertains to science, and the other one is the moral laws. So the first, Allan Kardec is also wondering, so where is that law written? Now we know that the laws are explained in the Spirit's book, but there's actually an overriding place which we all have. Where is God's law written? Which book is it in? We're wondering, right? But it's much easier, dear friends, because it's in our own conscience. So we carry God's laws around with us. The only thing we need to do is tune in and listen, to attune our so-called GPS to God. And we will always know whether something feels right or not, as long as we pause and check in. We do our nightly review, to review our day's actions, to see what is right and what is wrong, so we can make amends and transform ourselves. So we have God's laws in our conscience. This is good news, friends, correct? We don't even have to carry around a big old book. It's right here, easily packaged. And then Allan Kardec is also wondering, so who may we? And then if we continue on to question 632, Allan Kardec now is wondering, yes, okay, so there's the divine laws, and they help us with our moral development. And we know that the divine laws, that we have them in our conscience. And then he's asking us, who could we follow? And now we're hearing Jesus Christ. And then he's saying, but we humans, we're so prone to error. Couldn't we get confused still? And friends, we know the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. So if we could put that on our mirror, and in the morning, afternoon, and evening, whenever we frequent our bathrooms, at least in those moments, we could see and remind ourselves of the golden rule. I personally know from my own life, it makes a huge difference if we apply the golden rule as much as possible during every single day. So I think we understand God's laws a little bit better, right? Again, if you can read everything about God's laws, the explanation. Again, we just picked out the tip of the iceberg to kind of tie it together to make it a little bit clearer. So let us continue. with Monsieur Bray. So now he says, okay, we know that we need to follow God's law, not just our civil laws, right? So he explains now what he means by it. He says, a man who is honest in God's sight is one who out of devotion and love dedicates himself to a life of goodness. We must practice goodness according to Monsieur Bray. And then he says, we need to be zeal, active in fulfilling our physical tasks imposed by God, for he must teach others the love of labor. So in order to live a life according to God's law, we must teach others the love of labor. We must teach others the love of labor. What does he mean by that? So now we go back to the Spirit's book, question 675. That will cast a little bit more light. Useful occupation is labor. And one of the most important part for us is to remember that it is not just it is not just the physical body that labors, but our soul labors as well. So also, when we go to Thought and Life again, in chapter 7, in Understanding, in a chapter 7 work, we learn that we actually work for the sake of service, for the sake of serving. So not only is every useful occupation labor, not only does not just the body labor, but also the soul, but work, labor, is really for the sake of serving. And thanks to Emmanuel, we receive this expanded view of labor. So no wonder that, according to Monsieur Bray, it is important for us to focus on labor during our lifetimes and fulfilling it with glee, with joy. Practice love for God and His name. Men who are honest before God must carefully avoid acid words. Friends, let us see. Let's look at these acid words. That's not a good thing, right? We don't want to use spicy terminology. We don't want to speak ill of others. When we go to Thought and Life, chapter 28 is dedicated to illness. And there, let us go to it. It's always better to go right to the quotations from my perspective. Illness is on page 103. And here we learn that every strong emotion and thought that reaches the body is like a hammer blow on a sensitive machine. So when we use acid words, which usually have their origin in our acid thoughts, every acid thought, every acid word, every acid expression, according to Emmanuel, serves like a hammer blow on. No wonder that we at the end of our lifetime, or even during our lifetime, eventually we will get sick. So this is one reason to avoid acid thoughts. But we also, in the gospel, according to Spiritism, we also learn, where is my gospel? Here is my gospel. On page 205, we learn about vengeance, and 205, vengeance and slander. And we know that vengeance and slander are caustic. They're causing pain to others. And if we cause pain to others, what do? It first causes pain to us. It's like, I've heard this example before, if we want to throw perfume at someone, guess what? We can't do it without getting the perfume on us. It gets stuck on us as well. So now we have perfume on us and the other person has perfume on them. Now, if we use something else other than perfume, because perfume may smell really good, but if it's acid words, they hit us first. Everything hits us first. Very clearly, we learn this in thought and life. So we want to avoid vengeance, slander, talking badly about people at all cost. Acid words do not serve anyone, not us and not the person who the words are meant for. So let us see, friends. Now Grandpa, Monsieur Bray, continues to say, that poison, he's talking about acid words. Then he says, according to God, an honest man must always have a heart closed to any kernel of pride, envy, or ambition. Envy, pride, and ambition. Friends, we know that the most difficult part in ourselves on planet Earth, in the humans, is selfishness and pride. We learn from the spirits on high that the antidote to charity, which is really our goal, to incorporate charity more and more in our lives, and we remember benevolence, indulgence, forgiveness, doing the good, molding ourselves towards the good, we cannot do if we feel pride and selfish. And it is pride that feeds selfishness. So let us not indulge in this vice of pride and selfishness. And what is one way where we can nip it in the bud? And we mentioned it earlier. It is the golden rule. Because if we treat others as we would like to be treated, at that very moment, we kind of get away from ourselves a little bit more. We're looking towards the other, and it helps us to transcend selfishness and pride little by little. It is one way, dear friends. All right, so then he says, a man who is following God's laws must be patient and benevolent towards those who attack him. So we know Jesus taught us that if someone strikes us on one cheek, we must offer him the other also. And what did Jesus mean by that? We go to page 205 in the Spirit's book again. He was really teaching us how to return good for evil. He did not teach us that self-defense is wrong. No, of course, we need to protect our lives. But what he condemned in page 205, if someone strikes your right cheek, offer him the other also. What Jesus condemned by saying this was vengeance. So if somebody has spicy acid words towards us or any other painful action, we shall turn the other cheek, which really means we're returning good for the evil that has struck us. And that is not easy. But this is the invitation, the beautiful invitation Jesus gave us to do the good, to seek the good, to visualize the good, to mold the good with all the resources we have. So friends, that is the invitation that Monsieur Bray gives us as well, to never fight back, to never resort to slander, to never resort to any spicy words or mean actions towards others, but to return good for evil as Jesus taught us. So let's see, now we continue with Monsieur Bray. You can see there is a lot in these chapters, right? And there's even more. We're just picking out a few items, and so we invite you to really read this case again, and see some other aspects that are hidden between the lines. All right, friends, so then he says, this man who follows God's law, man or woman, must love the Creator in all his creatures. Must love the Creator in all his creatures, he says. Furthermore, he must put into practice that concise and grand summary of humankind's duties. And what is that, friends? What is the grand summary of humankind's duty? It is love God above all else, and your neighbor as yourself. Love God above all else, and your neighbor as yourself. Let us go back to the gospel, to the beautiful gospel. Page 255. Page 255, which is in chapter 15. Without charity, there is no salvation. And there's a chapter that Alan Kardec gifts us with, and it's called The Greatest Commandment. And here he teaches us, you shall and your neighbor as yourself. All the law, so God's law, and the prophets are contained in these two commandments. Namely, commandment number 1, you shall love God above all else, and commandment 2, and your neighbor as yourself. These are our two main commandments. And then he says one cannot truly love God without loving one's neighbor, nor can one love one's neighbor without loving God. So, of course, when we look at other people and we interact with other people, we're all children of God, right, friends? So, of course, we're invited. The invitation stands to see that if we love other people, we must love God, because these are his children, or his or her children. And if we love God, of course we have to love his or her children, right, friends? So it is actually a beautiful interplay that is being presented to us. And if we just follow these two commandments, love God above all else, and our neighbor as ourselves, which also the golden rule helps us with, it's one and the same. It will help us in our conduct. It will make us more kind, more benevolent, with more goodwill, more indulgent, and more forgiving. Yes, friends, it's a beautiful invitation, isn't it? Signor Bray was quite wise in teaching us of how to conduct ourselves in order to follow God's laws, which is really, the bar was just raised in this chapter, thanks to Monsieur Bray, from not just following the civil laws, but also God's laws. And of course, in order to follow God's laws, we need to study God's laws, right, friends? So studying God's laws, which we have the beautiful Spirits book for, and the Gospel according to Spiritism, to understand what the most perfect human being ever incarnated on planet Earth, namely Jesus Christ, the teachings that he brought to this planet. And both together will help us to perfect ourselves. Summarizes, closes, finishes the chapter, his presentation to his grandson, as follows. And that, my dear child, he says, is pretty much what honest men must do before God. So we need to be honest, we need to be good, we need to labor with zeal, we need to not use acid words, we need to release selfishness and pride, in other words, become more charitable. We need to pardon those who offended us, and finally, follow the two most important commandments, love God above all else and our neighbor as ourselves. These are the guideposts, that's our GPS. Very much leans up against the Beatitudes, doesn't it? So that is it. He says, and that, my dear child, is pretty much what honest men must do before God. Well then, did I do all that, he says? No, I didn't. So that's why Signor Bray is an average spirit, partly because of that. He says, I often failed at many of those conditions. I forgot the Lord, and that in turn drove me to other wrongs. Dear friends, do we ever forget the Lord? Where are we at? Are we always connected to God? Are we always feeling? Do we always have our station tuned into God? Do we follow God's laws? Do we make our own will? Do we align our own free will with God's will? That is our therapeutic question for tonight. Where are we at in terms of following God's laws? Yes, we need to meditate on that, right, dear friends? So, Signor Bray forgot. I have so understand this. So now that he is wiser, now that he is in the spirit world, Signor Bray has understood that was a mistake. He did some wrong, and he suffered much as a result. He has suffered much as a result. And we can change that today, friends. We can learn from him and be different right at this moment, right? And save us most likely a lot of heartache and suffering. And then he says, my dear child, say this and repeat it to all whose conscience is burdened. Say this and repeat it to all whose conscience is burdened. He's speaking to us too, right, friends? Yes, he's addressing us too. He says, you must get rid of your imperfections through the power of good deeds. You must get rid of your imperfections through the power of good deeds. And God's mercy will thereby extend over you. God's paternal eyes will take your trials into account, and this powerful hand will obliterate your wrongs. We need to get rid of our imperfections, he says, and we need to say that and repeat it according to him. We must get rid of our imperfections through the power of good deeds. And I think we've heard that before, right? Because we are reminded one more time of chapter 10 in Thought and Life by the Spirit author Emmanuel through the loving mediumship of Chico Xavier, where Emmanuel tells us so clearly, and we must mold goodness with all the resources we can muster. Friends, I can see that you probably had a hard time with the internet connection, and I'm really apologizing. I have no idea what to do about it. I'm not on Wi-Fi anymore because that doesn't really work well. But ever so often on a Sunday night, somehow our Wi-Fi here in the mountains is not 100%, and I truly apologize for that. And I hope it has not taken too much of us. In a nutshell, in summary, he taught us to make use of our time wisely and to be honest in God's sight, which means to follow God's laws. And we've not been so perfect, and most of us haven't, we need to keep in mind that we can always undo the shackles of our past wrongs, the handcuffs we forged against ourselves based on our past wrong actions and thoughts, by doing the good. So friends, by being of service, doing the good, this is my dog and somebody is coming, we are reminded in closing. Teddy, I apologize. I will release my dog to the outside. I'll be right back. So, Teddy. Yes, the joys of having a dog. So somebody's outside and that is aggravating him. So, as we said, we are doing the good, and as a result of more and more being of service, do our past wrongs. And in closing, we would like to remind ourselves of the prayer of Saint Francis once again, because it is the most beautiful, most concise prayer that teaches us of how to do the good and to focus on rather giving than looking to receive. And let us close our eyes, dear friends. Let us take a deep breath, release all the barking, and let us visualize. Let us visualize our beloved Jesus, our God, us in His beautiful light of love and warmth, of guidance and benevolence. And as we open our hearts and minds towards our guide and model, our beloved Jesus Christ, we're connecting also to Saint Francis of Assisi. And we are praying, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love, sow pardon. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. Where there is darkness, let me sow light. And where there is sadness, let me sow joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, that I may not seek so much to be understood, that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Dear friends, God bless you. We're wishing you a beautiful week wherever you are, that we may continue on the path of following God's guidance. In closing, I want to say hello to our community. There's Corina Lisi and so welcome, dear friends, and Tony Castro, and there is Sol, and there's Lucille Rovnak. So nice to see you here, dear friend. Thank you for joining. And Vanessa, thank you for joining as well. And Denida Moore is watching from Canada. Hello, dear friend. And Renata Casadei and Lisa Tellis. Oh, so many dear friends. It's so lovely to have you all here. And Sol is saying, as you said, time is the key for everything. It really is. It is the Divine Talisman. It is a gift. And the interesting part is it's different. The package of time is different for each and single one of us, right? Because our expiration date, so to speak, is at different times, right? And then there is Let Him Bark. He's learning with us. That's so true. Thank you, Sol, for your patience. Thank you, friends. And we're thanking Kardec Radio for this beautiful opportunity to meet in this intercontinental classroom every Sunday night at 6 p.m. from Northern California. Thank God. God is so good. Thank you, friends. Take care. Bye.